to protect
Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Well, as some of my fans say, I remain simple, easy, and awesome son of Africa.
And looking dapper too.
But what about you, man?
My friend, I'm looking up to you.
I actually feel like you might just be ready to go for it.
Well, just hand me that baton, then I'll take it and run with it.
And why not?
So, a warm welcome to you. All our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday. And today we'll look at maybe some of the most major stories that happened on the continent. But before we go to the continent, let's start here in the U.S. Capitol. So, Shaka, a lot is happening here in the United States. Of course, we are still talking about the impeachment of President Donald Trump nearly 4 weeks after the House voted to impeach the president.
Actually impeached him.
Yes. And so we don't know what has caused this stalemate, but as we speak today, the speaker finally said that tomorrow they will have a vote on the floor, and after that maybe they will send the articles of impeachment to the Senate so that the trial of the U.S. president can begin. Let's start there.
That's pretty much what I know, but I think what is of interest really, especially to you, me, and our listeners and viewers, is that it really has become a very huge story, a story that has attracted a lot of our viewers, our listeners. People are so much interested to know what's going on about the impeachment of Donald Trump, the man that occupies 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And once you occupy that, it happens to be, by the way, perhaps one of the most important political offices to occupy.
The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has, in a way, pledged that he's in total support with the White House. In other words, there is total coordination with the White House. But you probably know this better than I do. He's part of the jury that is supposed to be litigating this case once it goes to the Senate.
He is indeed, and he's going to have to take an oath to be an impartial juror. And even if he probably doesn't want, what could happen is that you just need the magic number, really, of 4 Republican senators, essentially to vote together with the Democratic Party senators and the 2 independent senators. Then it means that that will create an opportunity to work on the types of rules and laws and what have you, which could bring the issue of evidence and witnesses.
What are the chances that a sitting U.S. president could actually be voted or impeached and kicked out of office?
It's possible, but it's not easy, especially given that you do have, obviously, the person in charge of the Senate, who happens to be a Republican, as you said, and he also has made some of his views known. He also happens to be comfortably in command of the numbers, the mathematics. The Republican Party control the Senate, and there are not so many members, sincerely, who have showed at least some degree of individualism or independence and all that kind of stuff. But you could still have 4 rebels, probably led by Mitt Romney, who last night actually announced that he would be prepared to vote, for example, to listen to some witnesses, especially John Bolton, the man that used to be Donald Trump's national security advisor, a man who obviously knows a lot of things, and one of his junior officers, Fiona, sort of alluded to some of the statements he had made earlier that there was some kind of drug deal going on and he didn't want to be part of it.
Interesting. Let's go to a quick comment from a quick question from Muzei Nyabando Vitas Muhirwe. We would wish you to talk about politics of other countries outside of Africa. For instance, what is the meaning and implication of the Trump impeachment?
A very interesting, obviously, question, and it reminds me of when I was still in Uganda in the early 1970s. You are talking, at that time, there was also what was called Watergate. We're talking about Richard Nixon. At the time, it didn't really feature so much on television. So I remember each week I used to go running to the nearest bookshop so that I could get a copy of Time magazine and sometimes also Newsweek and all that kind of stuff. So I could actually get some kind of update as to what this thing called Watergate, how it was proceeding and all that kind of stuff. Little did I know that eventually a pen, two journalists, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, with their pen working as reporters for the Washington-based, you know, the newspaper. That in fact, this newspaper, Washington Post, could eventually overthrow the President of the United States of America. It reached a point where it was very, very clear that Richard Nixon did not have the support that he needed from even some of his Republican lawmakers, that he in fact figured out a way, an easier way to sort of lessen the humiliation. And he basically agreed to step down, to resign, and hand over power to his vice president, who was Gerald Ford. And it seems to me that just in the same way that I was interested in knowing about this thing called Watergate, thousands of miles away in the Ugandan capital, Kampala, and there were so many others, including students and faculty at your university, Makerere. There are so many people across the continent who are following these developments very, very closely. And I think they are right, because most of them happen to be under rulers who are democratically challenged to the extent that you cannot think or even remotely dream, perhaps, about the possibility of an average African president facing those type of circumstances. So this is a democracy at work. And democracy, in order for it to work, it means that you have to be accountable to the people that elect you to be in that position. And so what you're looking at are the three branches of government, which are co-equals, by the way. You're talking about the executive, which is led by the president, Donald Trump. Then you're talking about the legislature, especially the House of Representatives, which has the powers, at least according to the Constitution, of oversight, which is led by this wonderful lady, and he seems to probably be one of the most popular presidents in this town. I mean, politicians.
Popular speaker.
Yeah, in this town. And then you, of course,
have managed to rattle President,
yeah,
right?
You have the Senate, of course, and then you have the judiciary system, which, of course, is also having a Chief Justice who is supposed to be actually presiding during the Senate trial of the impeached president. These three branches of government have the constitutional mandate of essentially checking and balancing one another. And this is what is really lacking in most African countries. African countries need strong institutions. They need institutions which act independently, but not as subsidiaries of the executive, which is led by a president or a prime minister. And so basically what it is that in this country, the purse, the almighty dollar, is also controlled on Capitol Hill. It's controlled by the legislature, not the executive. Whereas when you go to a lot of countries on the continent, it is the president that controls a lot of things, even though, in fact, when you look at the powers that are allocated to their different branches of government on paper, it looks like it can actually work.
Right.
But unfortunately, the reality is that whoever is president for the most part calls the shots.
Right. Let's do a quick follow-up on that before we leave the impeachment thing. This is Gamblang. How legitimate is Trump's impeachment and its impact towards African leaders?
First of all, the first question really is a no-brainer. It's very legitimate because it is a constitutional requirement. What is going through is something that is constitutionally mandated. He is answerable to the American people. And nobody in this country, including the president, nobody is above the law or below the law. And so he has to account to the institutions that he has to interact with. You see, when you talk about the President of the United States, Paul, the President of the United States domestically is probably the weakest chief executive. But internationally, in terms of foreign policy, the President of the United States calls the shots. The President of the United States, therefore, can only navigate his way by negotiating around the strong institutions that he must figure out how to interact with them. And this is a society of laws. It is not a society of men or women.
Shaka, you seem to inspire a lot of young people across the continent. Before we go to the continent, we have like two personal questions. Let's start with Hachi Chiyuka. When I was young, I used to see my father listening about politics, and now I'm still growing up and listening to your program, especially Straight Talk Africa. You've inspired me to do so many things. There's another also comment here from Isaac Enangu. What can I do to be like you, Shaka?
You know, there are not many things that you really need to do. The only thing is that first and foremost, you need to be able to identify what you want. Once you are able to identify what you want, then you look for the appropriate tools that you need in order to navigate your way to whichever destination you want to head on. Now, if you want to be like Shaka, it's very simple, because Shaka is right here. Shaka can provide you with his shoulders. You climb on those shoulders, and once you climb on the shoulders of Shaka, at least you can be assured or guaranteed that you'll be able to see a little bit further than Shaka. But I think what you should actually be looking at is to be looking at being the best that you can be. And in fact, at the end of the day, be much better than Shaka. because Shaka too is what he is, precisely because there were those people who came before Shaka, and they were kind enough to lend their shoulders to Shaka. And Shaka was able to take advantage of that opportunity and climb on those individuals' shoulders in order for him to see a little bit further than some of those individuals. And that is part of the reason why you are able to interact with Shaka from Washington.
I can say that you are looking at a perfect example. I remember when you came to address our class at Makerere University, you spoke to thousands of us and inspired us to do better than we did at the time, and maybe probably find you in Washington, D.C. And today, I'm right here talking to you, not only just talking to you, but interviewing you. So good job on that.
I have to say that, to be honest with you, I'm very proud of the fact that you are right here, seated opposite Shaka, even though in 1997, I believe that is the year when it was actually, I was talking to students at Makerere University. You probably hardly, even dreamt remotely that one day you could be in Washington, D.C., a city where some of the most important decisions that affect all of us globally are made.
That's correct.
That you would be right here with Shaka, not only breathing the same air, obviously taking advantage of the same oxygen, but here you are, and not only are you breathing the same air, but look at your attire, my friend. You seem to be ready to receive the baton. So, go for it.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to our next segment.
Yeah, but having said that, you know better than perhaps anyone else that you can't simply be like someone. It's not good for you to simply look and identify with a finished product. It is even better to identify with the process. So you have to learn about the process through which they actually traveled, so that you can actually begin to know that you must work very, very hard, and that you have to be very committed, and that you have to focus like a laser beam. And that once you are able to do that, and you are disciplined enough, and you have humility and the desire to learn, nothing can stop you.
I'll take that into consideration, and I'll maybe, to the young people listening, that's some great advice. Shaka, we talk a lot about politics in Africa, about democracy. In your view or in your assessment, how do you think the continent fared this last year in terms of advancing our democracies, or in terms of democracy at large?
I have to say that we still really have a very, very long way. And I say that not because there are no efforts on the continent. There are some efforts. Last week, for example, you had a piece talking about many countries have actually gone through what you would call elections. But the question is, when you talk about those elections, are they really elections or are they selections? We have to reach a point, Paul, where we really have to have the confidence that if we are talking about an election, it is an election. And it is an election that is conducted by an independent electoral commission, a commission that is answerable to the people, not an individual, perhaps because that particular individual is an incumbent president or an incumbent prime minister. And that when an election is conducted, the results are reflective or reflect the will of the voter, the will of the people, not the will of the individual who announces the results.
Stalin style.
Stalin style, Joseph himself. Nor is it going to be the will of the individuals that are counting the vote on behalf of some particular individual who occupies the State House. I think Africa has a long way to go. We do have some good examples, like South Africa. We do have
But there are those people who say that South Africa, yes, on the surface, it seems there is a transition of power moves, but power has actually never changed from one political party, the ANC, to maybe the other small parties.
That is very true, but my brother, Japan had one dominant political party that ruled since the Second World War until not long time ago. There are some countries that you can look at, they go through that. The important thing, frankly, is not whether a country has a party that can stay in power. The question should be whether, in fact, that political party is, in fact, a beneficiary of a democratically electoral process. A process where, essentially, the political playing field is leveled, where it does not dominate, for example, the media landscape, where it does not dominate the funding in terms of campaigning and what have you, where people are free to go and meet others so that they can sell their message. In other words, you have to be in a situation where you do not have a situation where an incumbent president has a monopoly not only over, for example, the money, the media, the security forces, and what have you, but that particular individual also actually appoints commissioners of the Electoral Commission that is going to conduct the election and count the votes. In fact, this is a person sometimes who is so powerful to the extent that he could actually have the power to decide who accesses oxygen and who doesn't. And so we need a situation where things are predictable, where you know that every individual has the right to own an opinion, even if it is different from the ruling party or different from the government.
Shaka, how about on the positive side? Perhaps let me talk about the economic front. African leaders launched the Continental Free Trade Area. It's supposed to be about $3.4 trillion. This is going to unleash so much on the continent in terms of business, in terms of trade among African leaders. Personally, I think that was a great thing. What do you think?
I think ideally, I have no reason to disagree with you. The question is, how is it going to work? What about the issue of corruption and all that kind of stuff? What about the issue of free movement from one country to another, the visa issues, and you name it? But at the end of the day, unless you have a system that reflects social, economic, political justice for all, it's not going to work.
How would you respond to Emma's Hartz-Charles? How will Africa as a continent create a common identity of peace between its member states? We are talking about the Continental Free Trade Area that opens up the continent, but then we have a situation whereby countries are at loggerheads, countries are closing borders.
Yeah.
So how are we going to address those issues?
It is very interesting that you raise that, because the individual, in fact, who is behind the Continental Free African Trade is the Rwandan President, Paul Kagame. And
to his credit, yes.
Yes, and he deserves that credit. And yet, when you look at his situation with neighboring Uganda,
and Burundi,
then you begin to wonder, you say, what is this? Yes, you can talk.
He could argue that it's an island, Rwanda is an island.
You cannot be an island, you cannot afford to be an island. You cannot simply talk the talk without having the courage, the humility, and the guts to walk that talk, so that people can actually walk the walk. I think where there are some shades of light or some interesting developments really is in the Horn of Africa. Look at Ethiopia. Let's face it, we should give credit where it belongs. Abiy Ahmed I know that he is not perfect, and whatever he has done is not yet necessarily perfect, but you have to give him credit. The man has made a difference. Not only did the difference actually be acknowledged regionally, nationally, regionally, and internationally, to the extent that it actually resulted in the award of the Nobel Peace Prize for 2019. This man was able to help end the war, the unnecessary war. The former US President Barack Obama would probably have called it a damn war between the sisters and brothers of Ethiopia and the sisters and brothers of Eritrea. He was able to, to end that. He has been able to bring about major or fundamental reforms in some sectors, to the extent, by the way, that even economically, Ethiopia, with a huge market, with telephone communications and all that kind of stuff, it has now recently actually liberalized the industry. So it can start making some money and what have you, and people can start putting food on the table. So there is something going on in Ethiopia. Abiy Ahmed may very well be, again, a new bleed of African leaders.
We have less than 2 minutes to go. What stood out in the world of sports for you?
Incredible. Africa actually somewhat showed the world that it is a country a continent to reckon with. Look at rugby, for example. You had
the Springboks.
The Springboks of South Africa, and you remember their history is about discrimination. Black folks were never actually playing rugby. They used to play football. But for the first time, you have an indigenous black South African, a guy who actually is called Siya Kolisi. He was the captain of the World Cup champions. So that is great. And then you had
the Kenyan marathon runner,
Eliud Kipchoge.
No, Eliud
Kipchoge.
Yes.
And this guy did the marathon in less than 2 hours. He reminds me of the British athlete and doctor with a real clinic, Roger Bannister, a man who broke the sub-4-minute mile in 1954 at Oxford. I mean, he's incredible. It shows, when you look at the athletic achievements and what have you and some other things, it shows clearly that Africa can actually make it. If you give it an opportunity and what have you, work hard, you can do it.
In less than 30 seconds, any final thoughts, projections, big projections for 2020?
I can only say that we'll talk about some of those things tomorrow when we are talking about the reflections or some reflections of the significance of Pan-Africanism today.
Well, on that note, Shaka, it's been great. Thank you so much. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. To you all, our viewers, thank you so much. Keep those comments coming. We look forward to engaging you every Tuesday. Until then, so long from Washington.